everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
Is it possible, let's say in the future, we have solar harvesting in space?
Yes.
We can actually transmit that down to the Earth. In this case, let's say remote locations where there is ground infrastructure like these towers to receive it, and then another one to convert to DC for actual use. Is that feasible?
Yes, absolutely.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show.
I'm joined by Cherif Chibane, who is the CTO of WiGL and Chief Research Scientist at AuresTech. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Scott.
So let's first briefly talk about your long history as a researcher and a scientist at places like Draper Lab, MIT, BAE Systems, and now WiGL. If you could just elaborate, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. By the way, Scott, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this technology. I hope whatever I'll say will be of interest to your listeners. So my background is really, in a nutshell, I spent most of my career in wireless communication, and I've been involved in most of the Gs, the 2G, the 3G, the 4G, and I've done a lot of work in the area of the aerospace industry. When we say aerospace, meaning most of the work is directed towards DoD, which usually tends to be very advanced, and that's really the first thing that happens before it gets down to the commercial world. So my last job was at MIT Lincoln Lab before I started AuresTech. Right now, I'm the chief scientist, and basically my job is really to look at the technology where it is and do proof of concept to demonstrate whether the technology exists to solve whatever we're trying to solve right now. The last job I had was with the MIT Lincoln Lab, and I was there as a research scientist. And back then, what we were developing, this is for the DoD. In the DoD world, we have 5th generation aircrafts, and you need to train these people on wars that we're gonna have, but we don't have enough wars. So what we're doing is we were using wireless communication with some simulation to allow the pilots to be flying in real life, thinking he'll be flying his airplane, thinking that he's actually in a combat engaging enemies and everything. So that's what there's a lot of research going in that area. And then after that, I left MIT, and I decided we were in Boston. I couldn't take the weather. It's too cold, snowing every other day. So we decided to move down to New Jersey. So happened where my family, my kids are here. So we moved to New Jersey, and I wasn't sure what I'm going to do. I was sure that I'm going to do some consulting, keep doing some work for the research in the area for the aerospace. So I set up AuresTech, and AuresTech is very briefly what we do is we do proof of concept. So usually in the research, you have people coming up with algorithms, and they come up with simulations, but you don't know whether it really works in hardware. So our function is we take algorithm, we develop fast prototypes to prove the concept, get some experimental data, and then compare it with simulation data to tell you whether the technology exists or not. So then after I left, Dr. Glover called me and he said, Cherif, he has this idea. He wants to do transfer power from point A to B wirelessly. And I have to admit, I've never done any work in that area other than all the wireless communication that I've been involved in. So I looked around, and obviously the technology has been, Tesla tried it 200 years ago, whatever. And a lot of people have been working on this, and you have some companies that have these products that they've been at it for the last 15 years. But something that I have noticed is most of the people, they just deal what I refer to as point to point. They say you have a transmitter and you have a receiver, and that's it. And unfortunately, we are limited by the physics. The nature or whoever created the universe created the physics. So our concept is to make it short is we introduced the networking concept. We treated the power network the same as a cellular network. And that's what WiGL came, and WiGL stands for Wireless Grid LAN, which is the equivalent of WLAN. In WLAN, you get data. In WiGL, you get power. So the idea is you're roaming around, walking around, you're receiving power the same way you're doing it with data right now. That's kind of in a nutshell.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Cherif. And for those that are listening, and perhaps maybe we've lost you to some extent, is maybe a good reference point for the listeners is they probably have 5G or 5G compatible smartphones that can charge wirelessly by placing it onto a transmitter. And then, of course, your phone is a receiver. Here, I think what Cherif is really talking about is the ability to actually broadcast it in a network form, much like a cell tower or modem or a router, for instance, as an example. When it comes to the WiGL patent technologies for wireless powered networks, how is the WiGL-enabled transmitters churning the AC power into wireless power grids that then powers things like laptops, phones, television, and things within the house?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So basically, the transmitter is like any other transmitter. It receives power from the 120 from the wall, and then converts it to an RF signal. It's the same thing as a tower. You think of it as a tower. A tower right now is connected to power on the ground, gets AC, and then there is some signal processing in there involved, and then it sends an RF signal at the antenna. Okay? That's on the transmitter side. On the receiver side, you have the opposite. You have an antenna, and the receiver receives the RF signal. And in the case of the 5G, you receive the RF signal, make sure that it's for him, and so on and so forth. And then it does some image signal processing in there to extract whatever, be it audio or video or whatever it is. In our case, it's the same concept. We have a transmitter. So the idea is you can think of your power outlet. You will have a small device in there hooked up. That's our transmitter. Gets the AC, and we do some signal processing, and then sends it over an antenna over the air. You have a 5G network or a 5G handheld. On the other side, has a receiver in there. And in this case, think of it as a sleeve. You have a sleeve in there. That's the receiver. And then the receiver is walking, and then he's receiving power without even the user knowing about it. That's exactly how it's gonna work right now.
Now, of course, there are real physics and constraints. So It depends on things like antennas, things on power, and really the frequency as well. So, one of the more kind of the industrial or commercial applications that I've seen, again, it's different, but it's still helpful, is that South Korea's KAIST, or their MIT, has demonstrated the use of shaped magnetic field in residence, or SMFIR technology in electric buses for years. And they use this technology, and it's done in a safe manner, but it's transferring a large amount of energy. And that's the key difference is, if we're talking about household items, it's fairly small, but once we're talking about industrial applications, cars and so forth, you need a much larger power source and the grid to support that. And of course, they've had past projects like OLEV, as well as the current one, Y-Power 1, that's demonstrated safety and effectiveness in charging using 85 kilohertz frequency. How does your wireless power transfer allow for more sustainable electricity usage throughout daily consumption, both in the house, but really more interestingly, outside of the house in industrial contexts?
Yeah, so there are two things. Well, the technology that you cited about that MIT company, it's basically it's the same concept you have now when you put your phone on the top of of something that, basically you have a coil, you have a primary coil and the current coil on the secondary coil on the other side. And it's the same thing of the transformer. This is referred to as a very near field charging. Okay. What we're looking at far field charging. Far field charging meaning the transmitter and the receivers are separate and farther apart, usually 10 feet, 12 feet. People are talking about 20 feet apart. So in this far field, the propagation losses are the same. The propagation between the transmitter and the receiver are fixed by the physics. Nobody can do anything about it. Okay,
of course.
And that's what limited the distance between in the old days. Okay. Now, what our platform, what our approach is, think of in the home, and actually come to the power in the home and safety in a moment, if you don't mind. So think in the home, you have transmitters organized as base stations, in different locations in the home. And that location can be a power outlet, can be an overhead lamp, can be anything. And then these transmitters, they transmit low power, and they're organized as a network. So they have two channels. They have the one that sends the power, and they have another one, a Bluetooth or something. So your hand on the receiver side, your handheld, you have Bluetooth is in there, and you have a receiver. So when you come in via Bluetooth, you say, oh, okay, I'm Scott, and I need charging, and I'm close to this transmitter. This transmitter will automatically form small beam, low power beam, and then follows you as you move along. As you move around, it follows you. And as soon as you get farther from it, another beam takes over, and then that's what gives you the roaming. So with this, we solve the problem of distance. That means now by having these transmitters organized in a network, you're able to go over longer distance. That's what our solution brings the distance.
Yes. Now, so just to confirm what you're saying is, it's the density. It's a density of the transmitters. So you're essentially you're overlapping Venn diagrams of these frequencies. And because you're bathing in it, you're allowed to then move within a certain spatial context and be able to pick up the signal that's closest to you without any loss. Right?
Exactly. The same thing. Yeah, the same thing we're using in that's exactly what's happening in the cellular network. In the cellular network, you're hooked up to the tower that's close to you, and then as you move away from it, the handoff occurs, and you go to the next one. And that's kind of the same concept. And that's how we said we're going to improve that's how we improve the distance. Okay. Now, as far as to the power, and this is a really key element, is how much power the transmitter is going to send. All the demonstrations we've done now are within the FCC rules, because the handheld device, they have rules in terms of how much power you're transmitting and everything. Now, we're doing most of our experiments, we're doing them with handheld devices. And the reason because those are the challenging ones. And the challenging one for one simple reason. Right now, when you buy the handheld device, the maker of the device, they want you, Scott, to charge it only once and use it hopefully for a couple of days, because they don't want you to come back and charge it every other day. I mean, every hour. So they put in a very super battery in there, meaning it requires a lot of power to charge fast. Now, if technology like ours or any technology that allows you to charge wirelessly, you don't need the super duper battery that we have right now, which means all the handheld devices will use a very small battery in there, and has a huge impact on the cost of the devices and allowing the device to be conformal and do a lot of other things. So that's kind of what we see the benefit for this technology.
Okay, so just to kind of bring it back to the theme of our podcast, is the sustainability benefit is that when devices have much smaller battery footprints, because they're not having to depend on this notion of daily charge or every other day charge, it means that the unit is smaller, there's less material that's going in, there's less battery that's going in, and of course you got a lot of you don't have a lot of the post battery waste and recycling issues that comes up as a result.
Absolutely.
So from a consumer point of view, it makes perfect sense and certainly very feasible to have these transmitters within the home network.
Yeah.
Let's talk about in the context of industrial. So let's talk about something that all of us are starting to become very familiar with, which is around electric vehicle and the electrification. Those cars have incredible amount of batteries. They need a lot of battery, a lot of storage, and of course the range. It's all about range.
Yeah.
So how do you start to transmit that kind of power on an infrastructure industrial context where now you're starting to get into different kind of regulation, maybe FCC, but also DOT, Department of Transportation. And at some point, is it really more of a technical issue or is it more of a regulatory issue? Because there's a certain amount of energy that can be transmitted over the air, but is there a limit as to how much you can send or transmit before it starts to endanger humans or animals?
Yes. Yeah. I think for the cars where they require a lot of power, I think the near field will be the solution. And the near field could be when you come in and you park in the house and you don't need to connect anything underneath your car. It has the other side of the coil, like what people are doing right now, and you charge it. So that's one solution. The power is not really an issue because it's localized, and so that's one thing. There are some people that are talking about, I think in Europe they're starting to do some experimentation where they equip the highway with basically coils, and as the car is moving, you'll be able to charge as it's going. As a matter of fact, they're doing it in trains for low power, but over there they're harvesting the vibrations, because in vibration you can convert vibration to power. It's just very small and everything. So I think for very high power entities like cars, I think the near field will be the solution. I think the far field is probably not feasible, at least. Again, it's just my opinion. Maybe other people have other ideas, but
well, I agree with you. And the example that I gave from South Korea's KAIS is exactly kind of that approach of near field. It's just the problem with that is in the case of EVs is it doesn't really address the range. So it still forces you to have to dock your car at a near field home or a charging station. So that still, it's helpful, but it's not incredibly helpful. Let's go further into more industrial. So energy production as well as just manufacturing. How can the technology that you're building help both, all those different industries, but also really start to reduce carbon footprint on an industrial scale?
Yeah. So let me. On an industrial scale, the way I see it, and for instance, in your home right now, I'm sure, Scott, you have those USB connectors hooked up. The USB where you hook up your power to charge anything. Okay, even when you don't have anything connected to it, that device is still consuming power, albeit very small, but it's still consuming power. But multiply that by the billions of the things we have connected right now. That's very, very huge power that needs to be saved if you really want to save some energy. That's just sitting there wasted. Okay. The same, go ahead.
Yeah, so really what you're talking about is phantom energy. So when
Absolutely.
when we go on vacation and our devices are still connected, they're still actually consuming energy, just at a low wattage.
Absolutely.
So just to be clear for the audience, using the wireless network approach, it would not actually charge it unless it was actually connected and authenticated and granted, correct? So if you were leaving, you could in theory allow or set up your IoT hub so that you basically disconnect charge to the wireless network altogether, including for power.
Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is you're starting to see a lot of 12-volt power LED lights. So there are some people that are talking about, instead of wiring to those wires, you can just use maybe wireless transfer the wireless from one point to another point. So you don't really need to do all the wiring. You save all the wiring in the first one. On the industrial one, there is an application that people are looking at right now, especially for areas that are very hard to reach, and you want to get power from A to B. So one way is you do and dig trenches and all the hassle that's involved in there, all the power, all the footprint, power, energy that you generate and everything is you can. And we're talking to a couple of people, mostly for African countries, and if you have, what you can do is if you're going to go from point A to point B, you can use two towers, one on one end and one on the other end, and use a very highly directional RF signal. And then you basically send it from one side, you send it to the other side, you convert it to DC, and then you use that DC to power whatever that area in there. So that's one thing that people are looking at. And this is in some of the, especially rural areas that are very hard to reach. This will have a benefit in terms of saving all the hassle, all the energy that we're doing right now.
Yeah, and I want to take that example of the two towers and the conversion from AC to DC, and go even further to satellites. Is it from a total far field? Is it possible? Let's say in the future we have solar harvesting in space.
Yes,
we can actually transmit that down to the Earth. In this case, let's say remote locations where there is ground infrastructure like these towers to receive it, and then another one to convert to DC for actual use. Is that feasible?
Yes, absolutely. And there are some people who looked at that. And right now we are working with DARPA, and which is the same. The answer is yes. There are and what we're doing right now, we're working with DARPA. And what DARPA wants to do, they want to do the opposite. Okay, they want to have right now they have UAVs, and if they fly, and then if the battery runs out, they have to come back and recharge. So what they want to do is instead of coming back and landing and taking off, and then what they do, they want to come back to an area and then receive an RF. Either right now we're talking from the ground. So from the ground, you transmit RF to them. They sit over there. They charge and then they go back. The other one is have something in the air that collects the energy from the sun, converts to DC, and then sends it to power to the ground. Yes, there are some. That is definitely feasible, and I think I can see that something like that maybe applied when we go to the moon or the other application. I think that's probably, if you want to see that happening, I think it probably happened either on the moon or Mars before we do it. But the technology exists, especially on these areas because when you start talking about, you're talking about high power, which might be very dangerous for birds and all those things.
That's right.
But the technology exists.
Yeah, and certainly the moon has a dark side that needs to be powered, and there could be activities that need to support. So it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
My last question for you is for WiGL. Are you guys primarily holding patents and then licensing that, or are there actual end products that consumers or companies can actually purchase?
I think our business model, and I could be wrong, I'm just the CTO, but I think right now we're proving the technology. Our goal is build some evaluation kits, both the transmit and the receivers, and then we will make them available to people such as Apple's or the other people to evaluate it, and hopefully integrate it into their, license the technology and integrate in the device. I don't think we intend to be people who manufacture this stuff. That's not our forte.
Yeah, makes sense. So with that, I have been joined by Cherif Chibane, who is the CTO at WiGL, and he's also a Chief Research Scientist at AuresTech. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks a lot.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.